Seminar 22 begins much as the analysand begins, namely in the imaginary. Why in the imaginary? Because the Borromean knot with which Lacan starts Seminar 22 is first and foremost a drawing, a diagram, in which something consists. Three or more somethings, in fact. In particular, I'd say it's a two-dimensional image of a three-dimensional knot. You might even say it's an illusion, an optical illusion of topological depth in a flattened, planar diagram. That is what is on your screen right now. The drawing of the Borromean knot at the start of Seminar 22 is an optical illusion of topological depth, three-dimensionality, in a flattened, two-dimensional planar drawing. Lacan is even bolder here, you won't be surprised to learn. The Borromean knot, he tells us, is truly real, though only reflected in the imaginary. It's where real, symbolic, and imaginary, he says, really hold themselves together. More precisely still, it is a writing, Lacan goes on to explain. A writing which supports a real. That is what the drawing of the Borromean knot is. It is a writing which supports a real, but which is also, he adds, its only perceptible idea. You see, the real is unthinkable. Lacan also says this at the start of Seminar 22. But this doesn't mean it can't be written. And it's in the imaginary, at the level of planar geometry, in short, at the level of drawing, that this kind of writing occurs. You might think the goal here is to read this writing between the lines, intelligere, as Lacan quips on page 11 while dealing with those stupid Latins. But here's what I would say. We would be mistaken to try and read this thing between the lines. Instead of rushing at the diagram on your screen, this diagram of the Borromean knot with intelligence, Lacan advises us to approach it as imbeciles, from the Latin imbecilius, meaning weak or feeble-minded, and more literally from the Latin in plus baculum, meaning without a support staff. This is how we need to approach the Borromean diagram on your screen, without a support staff. Only by allowing ourselves to be duped by this diagram, mistaking its two-dimensionality for three, can we avoid being led too far astray here. Here, led astray by our intelligence. Lacan's pretty good on this. If you check out page 29 of our packet, he's got some pretty good points here. Page 29, check it out. To operate with this knot in a way that is appropriate, you have to base yourself on a bit of stupidity. The best way is, again, to use it stupidly, which means to be its dupe. You must not go into this subject obsessed with doubt, nor quibble too much. You've heard it from our boy before, most notably since Seminar 20. Stupidity, not intelligence, is the motor force of analytic theory and technique. And imbecility in particular, especially when it comes to the analyst. Lacan asks in Seminar 22, can the analyst behave like an imbecile? It is a very important question. Or is the analyst too smart for all that shit? Too smart to become an imbecile in the clinic, an imbecile in the discourse which is their namesake? There's that word, discourse. You'll recall that from Seminar 17 forward, Lacan conceives of discourse as a structure. Here, at the start of Seminar 22, he tells us this structure, that is discourse, is effectively the structure of a game. And this game has the structure of an ethic. Indeed, Lacan claims on page 5, there is no other ethic than that of discourse qua game. The analytic discourse is no exception. So here's the question. Do you play its game in full, immersing yourself in its so-called reality? And mark my words, never has there been a better word in the imaginary than reality. Or, my dear analysts, do you refuse to be its dupe? Only by refusing to be duped by one's own discourse can one go profoundly astray in it, and ever at one's own risk. This is what Lacan means when he says le non duper. No one strays further than the one who refuses to stray at all. Oh wait, when I just said le nom du père, did you hear me say le nom du père? The no of the Father? Or maybe you heard the name of the Father? I sure as hell hope so. I'd hate to be the only dupe here. RSI, RC, RC, heresy. Let's not be too smart about this one. Reading real, symbolic, and imaginary between the lines of Lacan's three-lettered title. Let your ears deceive your eyes here, my friends. Which ought to be easy enough, Lacan wagers, because they're all anchored in the same damn body. Or so it seems to have one of these damn bodies. A self-same, singular, and for this reason damned body. Notice what I'm after here. I'm not asking what it is to be a body. We're talking about what it means to have one, and to have one in the world of appearances, where seeming is all. This is the riddle of the body at the start of Seminar 22. Now, if you tuned in to our last series on La Troisième, you know the answer to this riddle. But it's also on the tip of Lacan's tongue at the start of Seminar 22. Meet me on page 10 to review the key passage. There is something which makes the speaking being show himself determined to be mentally feeble, and this is the result solely from the notion of the imaginary, to the extent that the starting point for the latter is the reference to the body, and to the fact that its representation, I mean everything that is represented for it, is nothing but the reflection of its organism. Lacan's question here is a familiar one, especially for anyone who's read his early work. How do we mostly experience our bodies? Answer: at the level of their representations, their reflections, namely in and as their specular images. This is why I stress having over being at this point. The question of the human body for Lacan in the mid-1970s is not what it's like to be one, but instead how we come to have one. The beaver, the oyster, the shrimp, the tree, all are bodies in the real, organismic, bioanimalistic realm of life. But the human body, the body of the one that speaks, is something to be had at the level of its representation, in the flattened, planar illusions of three-dimensional life characteristic of the imaginary. You see where we're going with this, right? Notice how it breaks down for Lacan. On the side of the real, in this field he describes as life, we see questions of plant and non-human animal, particularly questions of their enjoyment. Questions Lacan has been asking since he introduced discourse. Does the plant enjoy? Does the non-human animal enjoy? Name your non-human animal. He's got a ton of them. Do they enjoy? This is the realm of life. And where do we put it? We put it in the field of the real. So I label it here on your diagram. In the field of the real, we write life. And where does the body go? For Lacan, it's up here, in the imaginary. Life in the real, body in the imaginary. Notice, this is where we have a body. We have a body in the imaginary. Even if we are one in the real, we have a body in the imaginary at the level of its representation, in flattened specular images of three-dimensional bioanimalistic life. Here, in specular images of our own bodies, Lacan says we find the origin of imbecility. That's a crucial part. But notice, in this period of his thought, he also says that this origin of imbecility, that is the human body as specular image, is also the origin of the universe. The origin of imbecility, and with it the origin of the universe? Now that's a lot. Let's take these one at a time. The stakes are high, so I want to move slow and steady here, gauging just how far we can push each matter. To start, a few points on imbecility. In order to conceive of human being, to say nothing of treating its ailments, we have to think topologically. But in order to think topologically, we must resort to board work, drawings, diagrams, figurations of all kinds, all of which flatten 3D topologies into 2D imaginaries. Three-dimensional topologies are flattened into two-dimensional imaginarium. This is how the imaginary works. Flattening is endemic to its function. In fact, Lacan is pretty good on this in Seminar 22. He says, it's on this that all figuration is based. All figuration for Lacan is based on a certain type of flattening that is endemic to the imaginary. What does this flattening require of us? Especially if we want to use drawings, diagrams, figures, and other board work to think topologically, and by extension, to conceive of human being as Lacan does. What does it require of us? Imbecility. From 2D imaginaries to 3D topologies to clinical and conceptual treatments of human being, you have to be a fucking imbecile to walk this path. What Lacan is adding here in Seminar 22 is that it's by way of the body, not as organism, but instead as image, that we cut our teeth as imbeciles. Pages 22 to 23 of our text are pretty damn good on this point. Let me see if I can get this unwieldy packet of mine out one more time and call your attention to the key passage, 22 to 23. How is it that we need this flattening in order to be able to represent any kind of topology? It is quite certainly a question which pertains to one concerning debility that I qualified as mental, in as much as it is rooted in the body itself. Fair enough. But how do we get from here to the fucking universe? Why is the specular image of one's own body also, according to Lacan, the origin of the universe? As always, when it comes to that universe, we have to think literally, litorally even, reading universe to the letter and paying special attention to all the etymological litter that we find in the terms wake. Don't be a smart psychoanalyst here, my friends. I'm asking you to join me as a dense philologist instead. As you know, and all the more so if you've been tuning into these lectures on Lacan, universe is rooted in the Latin unus, meaning one, and crucially vertere, meaning to turn. To universalize is to turn many into one, reducing a complex multiplicity to an image of discursive singularity. When Lacan says bodily representation is the origin of the universe, he means our bodies are the first and foremost multiples to appear to us as singularities instead. By way of specular images, each a flattened imaginary figuration, we turn our bodies into ones. In the perceived unity of our own bodies, fragmented bodies, mind you, made to appear consistent. There's that word again, consistent. Here we find a blueprint, a model even, although Lacan hesitates with this word model, for every other universalization that populates our imaginaries, discursive, political, galactic, you name it. In the perceived unity of our own bodies, we find a blueprint for the universe. From galactic to political to discursive to interpersonal to intrapersonal, you name it. Which is why I think we still need Granddaddy Whitman. Granddaddy Walt Whitman, for those of you that don't know, and don't get me started on Grandmommy Emily Dickinson. But we still got to have Granddaddy Whitman when it comes to this stuff. This is one of several reasons why he remains profoundly relevant. You see, you may feel as singular and solid as a silver coin stamped e pluribus unum, but you'd be better off reading Leaves of Grass, I would submit. Do I contradict myself? Very well, then, motherfucker. I contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes. Let that be your song of self. The universe be damned. Now, if you're following what we're putting down here, you got to wonder what goes in that white circle. Life in the real, body in the imaginary. What do we put in the symbolic? Well, if you paid attention last time, you know what goes in the symbolic. I'm going to write it. Death. life in the real, death in the symbolic, and the body in the imaginary. This is what we're up to at the start of our series on Seminar 22. So I tell you, yet again in different words, fuck God's knowledge. When it comes to the real, Lacan would rather ask about plants and animals. Does the tree of good and evil enjoy? And how about all the critters named along the way by them two? Them two what? Them two sexes. Beavers, oysters, shrimps, horses, rats, sticklebacks. They're alive. None have bodies. Why? Because all are bodies. You want the real in a word, better even than existence? It's written on your screen. In the fall of 1974, the word Lacan chooses for the real is life. Libido, anyone? No, thank you. I'll have your lamella instead. Oh, and over easy if you don't mind. Now, if you can't quite recall why I just wrote death in the symbolic, you might want to give another read to Lacan's Function and Field essay, because it's here, I think, more than anywhere, that you get the sense that the symbolic is a killing field. I told you last time the symbol marks the death of the thing, and this death the endless perpetuation of my desire, yours and as well. It's from the same essay. Why am I saying this? Why am I emphasizing this? Because the symbol remains what it's been from the start. And Lacan is all over this in the 1950s. It's a tombstone. Tombstone after tombstone. This is what we find in the symbolic, and this is the reason why I write death in its remit. Tombstone after tombstone, each occasioning the passage of life, but also its partial preservation, atop which we build our own. Life atop death. This is our lot, and precisely why we cannot fathom the life of plants and non-human animals, particularly as they enjoy. Or at least according to Lacan. And he's been saying it from the start. Again, not just here in his later teaching. I gave you a little riff from that Function and Field of Speech and Language essay, the great manifesto of Lacanian Psychoanalysis. Let me hit you with a slightly more extensive passage. It's just on the next page in EURIAS, page 263. I'm going to read it in full because I really want to share this thing with you. Ooh-wee. Notice how things fall into place for Lacan here in the mid-1950s. It is impossible, he says, not to see how loftily this life transcends that inherited by the animal, in which the individual fades into the species, since no memorial distinguishes its ephemeral appearance from the appearance that reproduces it in the invariability of the type. Indeed, apart from the hypothetical mutations of the phylum that must be integrated by a subjectivity that man is still only approaching from the outside, nothing, except the experiments in which man uses it, distinguishes a particular rat from rats in general, a horse from horses, nothing except the amorphous passage from life into death. Whereas Empedocles, by throwing himself into Mount Etna, leaves forever present in the memory of men the symbolic act of his being toward death. It's from McCree, page 263. Note this amorphous passage from life to death. There is plant and non-human life as near as we can tell, according to Lacan. But for us, it is different. The life of human being A life of socio-linguistic existence is a life founded atop death instead. The death inaugurated by the symbol. Life in the real, as figured in our inability to say whether plants and non-human animals enjoy. Like God's knowledge, ours of bio-animal jouissance is impossible. Which brings us to the symbolic. If we have life in the real, just as Lacan has described it, we see death in the symbolic. Death in the symbolic, where all that is presupposes even more that it is not. Life atop death. This is what it means to be human. Right now, above ground, so to speak. Take a second and just reflect with me on this. Most humans on this planet, if you think about it, have already passed back into it. My understanding is that demographers estimate about 117 to 120 billion people have ever lived in human history. That number depends on when you think humanity began, but I think a safe number here is 117 to 120 billion have ever lived in human history. Now, how many humans walk the earth today, right now, above ground? 8.1 billion. You do the math. 94% of humanity is dead. Life atop death. And ever by way of the symbol, welcome to our jungle. Not the amorphous passage from life into death, but the symbolic passage again and again from death into life. And you could say the same about plants and non-human animals, right? Here's the point. They can't. You can say the same about plants and animals if you like, till you're blue in the face. What Lacan is here calling our attention to is the fact that they, as plants and non-human animals, cannot. And that's the key difference. It's why they're in life and not death on your screen. I think Lacan's point here is another one that my man Kenneth Burke made. And you wonder sometimes, why does McCormick keep bringing up this guy, Kenneth Burke? I've said it before, I'll say it again. Kenneth Burke, for my money, is the second greatest reader of Freud. The first is Lacan. Kenneth Burke is a close second in terms of reading Freud and doing amazing shit with what Freud came up with. And one of the things Burke says is relevant here. It's also from his definition of humankind. We are separated from natural life by tools of our own making, and one tool more than any other, the symbol. So let me ask you one of these questions, the questions I'm so inclined to ask throughout all of this 1970s Lacan business. All I got are questions, man. Here's another one. Is the specular image of the human body a symbol? No. Okay, why not? Again, don't be smart here. Don't try and be an intelligent psychoanalyst. Join me once more in becoming a stupid philologist instead. Symbol descends from the Greek symbolon, a mashup of sim, meaning together, and with. Sim means together and with. And added to that is the Greek verb balion, meaning to throw. The symbol is that which is thrown together, put together, made to hang together. In short, assembled. It operates in a differential field known as language, and more broadly the symbolic. But it also functions as a differential field in itself. The Romans understood this. In Latin, a symbolon was a token of identity or recognition. You may have read about this in the Chattering Mind. Two friends take a piece of pottery. It's usually a scrap, a piece of shit, a broken piece of pottery or something. And they break it in half, each keeping a piece, so that their descendants could prove kinship and connection by bringing those two pieces back together and showing how precisely they fit. One piece broken into two, the two are held and then brought together as a token of identity, belonging, kinship, intimacy even. How else do you explain that necklace that you and your partner got in junior high, in middle school? One heart broken into two, and then one half of the heart goes on your necklace and the other half of the heart goes on their necklace. And then when you get together, you bring your two half hearts together and poof, Voltron, poof, I mean Aristophanes, poof, I mean narcissistic love, poof, I mean oneness, poof, I mean bullshit. This is what the symbolon was. It had more to do with things being brought together, not to form one. That's the fantasy. But to make things hang together, to make communities and relationships hang together. Were the Latins as stupid as Lacan jokes? I don't think so. I hope you see where I'm going with all this. Symbols always come in twos, and they always come in two. Not so with representations of one's own body. This is why the specular image is not a symbol, at least not at root. The structural logic of the specular image is not difference, but identity, not plurality, but union, not two-ness, but oneness. In short, consistency to the point of universalization. There's your specular image. There's your representation of the body and the reason why we write it in the imaginary. On this point, I think Lacan is fairly good and even a little adamant, especially in La Troisième, just a couple of weeks before the start of Seminar 22, mind you. The perceived unity of our body, he says there, obliges us to think of it as a universe. I think we are now at last able to start focusing on the diagram in front of you, the diagram on your screen, a drawing of the Borromean knot, which Lacan wastes no time trotting out at the start of Seminar 22. The diagram once more appears for us on page 20 of our version of the text, just if you want to see the context in which Lacan brings it forth. Look carefully, if you will, at these rings, these three rings on your screen, constitutive of this drawing of the Borromean knot. One labeled R for real and marked by life, another labeled S for symbolic and indexed death, a third, did I just say a third? That's the thing about Lacan. RSIIRS. You can mix them up, sir, and be just fine with this. The point is that there are three. In the imaginary rewrite body, and that's our red ring here on the screen. But look carefully at them with me. Zoom in even. And check out the knot that they form. These aren't just overlapping circles. Instead, they're interwoven, again like braids of hair. And I'm going to try and emphasize this so that we can really see how this is playing out. I'm going to thicken up the lines if I can, even at the risk of fucking up our image. The white ring of the symbolic overlays the red ring of the imaginary. So if we're going to emphasize this, you can see the white ring of the symbolic, it's shown as overlaying the red ring of the imaginary. And I'm emphasizing thickening the lines here so that you can see that it's an overlaying illusion. It looks like the white circle overlays the red. Now note the blue circle. Note how this thing goes. The blue circle looks a lot like it overlays the symbolic. So I'm going to thicken up our blue line here so you can see the overlayment. The blue circle overlays the white of the symbolic, but it underlays the imaginary. And what that means is the imaginary overlays the real. And so I'm going to thicken up this portion of the red ring so that you can see where the overlayments and underlayments are on this thing. These are not just circles drawn on top of each other in any random order. This is not the Audi symbol. This is not the fucking Olympics. The Borromean diagram that Lacan's working with is an optical illusion of three-dimensionality, where it looks like things are on top, woven through, pushing under, creating overpasses, and the like. Or so it seems. And this part is crucial. The diagram on your screen is an optical illusion. In other words, it's an imaginary construct. 3 rings? Red, white, and blue? No. In fact, look again. There's not a single unbroken ring on your screen. Instead, you see 6 strokes of the pen. Count them. In fact, what I'll do is, I'm going to count them with you, because this thing's tricky, and sometimes I misdraw it. But let's go ahead and count them from the top bottom. Let's count how many strokes of the pen we have here. Well, we've got 1, in the imaginary, but another separate stroke in the imaginary. The ring that is labeled I for imaginary is in fact comprised of 2 different lines, 2 different curved lines that provide the illusion of a single ring. But because the symbolic overlays the imaginary in this diagram, what we see are 2 distinct lines. Let's move on to the symbolic. Count them with me again. There's another and another still. The white ring on your screen is nothing of the sort. It is in fact 2 curved white lines that provide the illusion of a single ring. And you know where I'm going with this, right into the real, where we find a 5th curved line and a 6th curved line. You do not see 3 rings, red, white, and blue on this screen when you actually zoom in and let yourself get a little smart with it. What you see instead are 6 strokes of the pen, 2 red, 2 white, and 2 blue. Instead of the illusion of 3 distinct rings, we can now, by zooming in, see that in fact this illusion is comprised of 6 distinct strokes of the pen, a differential field, if you will, of pen strokes that hang together. But in the imaginary, they look like they stick together. And how about those interwoven relations with the symbolic overlaying the imaginary while the real overlays the symbolic but underlays the imaginary? It's another optical illusion, here facilitated by the breaks you see in each ring that allowed us to count 6 strokes of the pen. This is what Lacan means when he says we have to be imbeciles to think with him. Again, we begin like the analysand, squarely in the imaginary. Everything seems to consist. Consistent rings interlocked in a consistent pattern, allowing for 3-dimensionality. You have to be an imbecile to see the diagram this way. You have to let the diagram fool you. You have to be the diagram's dupe to see it this way. All of which, according to Lacan, is better than the alternative, which we just worked through, where you refuse to be fooled by this optical illusion, where you refuse to be its dupe, where you refuse to be the imbecile. And thus, with each refusal, you wander ever further astray from Lacan's teaching than if you hadn't. Le nom du père, the title of Seminar 21. This is partly what it means. Those who refuse to be deceived are among the most misguided. Why? Because they miss the opportunity to think topologically by way of the imaginary, and as a result cannot fathom human being as Lacan now sees it, namely as a pulsing entwinement, a weave that lives, comprised of real, symbolic, and imaginary experience. Only by mistaking two-dimensionality for three, even in the spirit of thirdness, can we begin to follow Lacan's lead in Seminar 22, walking the clinical and conceptual path that he seems to be laying out for us in these early lessons. What he calls on page 11 a garden path of mental feebleness. Wait a minute. How can this be? We have to err in order to avoid straying from this garden path? We have to think like imbeciles in order to follow Lacan's teaching? Think about that for a second. You've been racking your brain trying to understand Lacan. Now he tells you need to be stupider. And imbecility is not the same. Imbecility is a subset of stupidity for Lacan. You have to think like an imbecile to keep up with him. This sounds like some psychoanalytic heresy, wouldn't you say? Exactly. RSI. Heresy. To help us remember the importance of this illusory, errant, imbecilic venture, Lacan has given the red circle of the imaginary pride of place in his diagram. Notice where it is. It's on top, vertically speaking. You might not see it this way, but he sure does. And I got to show you where he calls this out. He sees the imaginary as the dominant figure here. It's on page 19 of our packet. With the blue circle, I have figured the real, he says. With the white circle, the symbolic. And with the red circle, the one that finds itself supported by the three is shown here as dominating them. Pay close attention here. I don't think this is an irrelevant point. It's often thought, and all too often said, that Lacan's thinking moves through three stages, from the imaginary to the symbolic to the real. Early, middle, late Lacan. You probably have heard this before. It's also often said that the shift from middle to late Lacan, from the symbolic to the real, is one in which tropeology gives way to topology. From metaphors and metonymy to Mobius strips and Klein bottles, and from signifiers and symptoms to letters and symptoms. There's certainly some truth to this, but there's also something missing, namely Lacan's return to the imaginary, in between the symbolic and the real. Starting, I would say, in Seminar 20, where narcissistic love takes pride of place. What we're seeing here in the fall of 1974, with all of these Borromean drawings, I believe is the apex of this resurgence of the imaginary and Lacan's thought. But I don't want this to be the final word in this second lecture on Seminar 22. So let me offer 3 others. Let me remind you of 3 others and recall for you once more where we write them in the diagram on your screen, because I want us to start thinking here with these 3 final words. In the blue ring of the real, we again write life. In the white ring of the symbolic, we again write death. And in the dominant red ring of the imaginary, overlaid by the symbolic and underpinned by the real, we write the body, yours and mine alike, but only in its representational